What if everything you believe about yourself is just a story you've been telling on repeat? Bruce Lee once challenged a powerful idea. You are not who you think you are. Not your fears, not your past, not even the labels you've accepted, without question. Beneath all of that noise lies something far more real, something fluid, limitless, and waiting to be discovered. Bruce Lee challenged one of the most deeply rooted assumptions people carry throughout their lives. The belief that identity is something fixed, solid, and unquestionably real. From early childhood, individuals begin to absorb labels, names, roles, expectations, and definitions given by family, culture, and society. Over time, these labels accumulate and harden into what feels like a permanent sense of self. A person begins to say, "This is who I am," without realizing that this self is largely constructed from repeated thoughts, external influences, and internalized narratives rather than something inherently true or unchanging. The idea that identity is a mental construct means that what people consider their personality, strengths, weaknesses, and even limitations are not absolute realities, but interpretations shaped by experience. For example, someone who was once told they were not good enough in a particular area may carry that belief into adulthood, allowing it to define their actions and choices. Over time, the repetition of this belief reinforces it, creating a self-image that feels real but is actually built on a fragile foundation of perception. This mental framework acts like a filter, influencing how situations are interpreted and how individuals respond to challenges. In this sense, identity functions less like a solid object and more like a story constantly being rewritten. Every memory, success, failure, and interaction contributes to this narrative, but the narrative itself is selective and subjective. People tend to emphasize certain experiences while ignoring others, shaping a version of themselves that aligns with what they already believe. This creates a feedback loop where beliefs reinforce perceptions, and perceptions strengthen beliefs. The result is a constructed identity that feels stable but is actually dynamic and fluid beneath the surface. Bruce Lee often emphasized adaptability and fluidity, famously encouraging the idea of being like water, formless, flexible, and capable of taking any shape. This philosophy directly opposes the notion of a rigid identity. If identity were truly fixed, growth and transformation would be impossible. Yet human experience clearly demonstrates that people change over time. Skills are developed, perspectives evolve, and behaviors shift based on new experiences. This ongoing change highlights the constructed nature of identity, revealing that it is not something static but something continually shaped and reshaped by thought and awareness. Another important aspect of identity as a mental construct is the role of language. The words people use to describe themselves carry significant power. Statements like, "I am shy," "I am not creative," or "I am a failure" may seem like simple descriptions, but they act as reinforcing mechanisms that solidify certain beliefs. These statements are not objective truths. They are interpretations that become embedded in the mind through repetition. Once internalized, they influence behavior in subtle but profound ways, often limiting possibilities and narrowing the range of actions a person feels capable of taking. The mind tends to seek consistency, which means it prefers to act in ways that align with its established sense of identity. If someone believes they are not confident, they may unconsciously avoid situations that challenge that belief, thereby reinforcing it. This creates a cycle where identity shapes behavior, and behavior in turn strengthens identity. Breaking this cycle requires recognizing that the identity itself is not an unchangeable reality, but a pattern of thought that can be questioned and redefined. Bruce Lee also pointed out that clinging to a fixed identity can become a source of limitation and conflict. When individuals strongly identify with certain labels or roles, they may resist change or feel threatened when those labels are challenged. For instance, someone who strongly identifies as successful may struggle deeply when faced with failure, not just because of the situation itself, but because it conflicts with their self-image. Similarly, someone who identifies as the quiet one may avoid opportunities for expression or leadership even when they have the potential to excel in those areas. This attachment to identity can create internal tension, especially when reality does not align with the constructed self-image. The mind may attempt to preserve the identity by rationalizing, denying, or distorting experiences, rather than allowing for growth and change. This defensive mechanism further reinforces the illusion of a fixed self, making it more difficult to see identity as something flexible and evolving. At a deeper level, the concept of identity as a mental construct suggests that there is a distinction between awareness and the content of the mind. Thoughts, beliefs, and labels arise within the mind, but they are not the same as the awareness that observes them. This distinction is subtle but significant, as it implies that identity is not the core of who a person is, but rather a layer of interpretation placed on top of that core. By recognizing this, individuals can begin to detach from limiting beliefs and see them as temporary constructs rather than permanent truths. The process of questioning identity often involves examining the origins of one's beliefs. Where did a particular label come from? Was it based on a single experience, the opinion of someone else, or a pattern that developed over time? By tracing these beliefs back to their source, it becomes easier to see that they are not absolute realities but interpretations that have been accepted without scrutiny. This awareness creates space for change, allowing individuals to redefine themselves in ways that are more aligned with their current understanding and potential. Bruce Lee encouraged a mindset of continuous growth and self-exploration, which naturally aligns with the idea that identity is not fixed. Instead of clinging to a rigid sense of self, he advocated for embracing change and remaining open to new possibilities. This approach allows individuals to move beyond the limitations imposed by their constructed identities and to explore different aspects of themselves without fear of contradiction or inconsistency. Ultimately, viewing identity as a mental construct shifts the perspective from one of limitation to one of possibility. It challenges the assumption that this is just who I am, and replaces it with a more dynamic understanding of self. This shift does not eliminate the sense of identity altogether, but transforms it into something more flexible and adaptable, capable of evolving in response to new experiences and insights. Self-awareness begins as a quiet but powerful shift in perspective, where attention turns inward and starts observing thoughts, emotions, and reactions without immediately identifying with them. Most people move through life on a kind of autopilot, reacting to situations based on habits, past experiences, and deeply ingrained beliefs. In this state, there is little distinction between who they are and what they think they are. The voice in the mind, with its constant stream of judgments and narratives, becomes accepted as truth rather than recognized as interpretation. Self-awareness interrupts this automatic process by creating a space between observation and identification. Within that space, a gap starts to appear, a subtle but significant difference between the actual experience of being and the constructed image of the self. This gap is not always comfortable to notice. It can reveal inconsistencies, contradictions, and illusions that were previously hidden beneath layers of certainty. For example, someone may believe they are confident, yet feel anxious and uncertain in unfamiliar situations. Another person may see themselves as kind, yet notice moments of impatience or judgment. These contradictions do not mean that one identity is true and the other is false. Instead, they highlight that the fixed image of self is incomplete and often misleading. Self-awareness does not attempt to immediately resolve this gap. Instead, it allows it to exist, encouraging deeper observation. When thoughts arise, such as "I am not capable" or "I always fail," self-awareness recognizes these as mental events rather than absolute truths. This recognition weakens the automatic attachment to those thoughts. The mind may still produce them, but they lose some of their authority. Over time, this changes the relationship a person has with their own thinking, shifting from unquestioned belief to curious observation. The gap between who someone is and who they think they are becomes more visible through this process. The thinking self is built from accumulated experiences, labels, and repeated narratives. It seeks stability and certainty, often clinging to familiar patterns even when they are limiting. The observing awareness, on the other hand, is not bound by these patterns. It simply notices what is happening in the present moment: thoughts, emotions, sensations, without needing to define them as part of a fixed identity. Recognizing this distinction can be transformative, as it reveals that identity is not as solid as it appears. One of the ways this gap manifests is through emotional reactions. When a situation triggers a strong response, self-awareness can step in and examine what is happening beneath the surface. Instead of immediately reacting, a person might notice the surge of emotion, the accompanying thoughts, and the impulse to act. This pause creates an opportunity to question whether the reaction is aligned with reality or driven by an internal narrative. Often, the reaction is tied to a belief about the self, such as needing to be accepted, validated, or in control. By observing this process, it becomes clear that the reaction is not an inevitable expression of identity, but a conditioned response. Another important aspect of self-awareness is recognizing how much of the self-image is influenced by external factors. Social expectations, cultural norms, and the opinions of others all contribute to the way individuals see themselves. Over time, these influences become internalized, forming a self-concept that feels personal but is largely shaped by the environment. Self-awareness brings these influences into focus, allowing individuals to question whether the identities they carry truly reflect their authentic experience or simply mirror what they have been taught to believe. The gap also reveals itself in moments of change or challenge. When circumstances shift, such as a new environment, a different role, or an unexpected failure, the existing self-image may no longer fit. This can create a sense of confusion or discomfort as the mind struggles to reconcile the old identity with the new reality. Self-awareness helps navigate this process by acknowledging that the discomfort arises from the attachment to a fixed idea of self. By observing this attachment, individuals can begin to loosen its hold and adapt more fluidly to changing conditions. There is also a subtle but important difference between knowing something intellectually and experiencing it directly through self-awareness. A person might understand, on a conceptual level, that identity is flexible, yet still feel bound by their established self-image in daily life. Self-awareness bridges this gap by bringing attention to real-time experiences. Instead of relying solely on abstract ideas, it engages with the immediate flow of thoughts and emotions, making the distinction between the observer and the observed more tangible. This ongoing observation gradually changes the way identity is perceived. Rather than seeing it as a fixed entity, it becomes clear that it is composed of shifting elements, thoughts that come and go, emotions that rise and fall, roles that change depending on context. The gap between being and thinking becomes less of a separation and more of a dynamic interplay. Awareness remains constant, while the content of the mind continues to evolve. Self-awareness also highlights the tendency of the mind to seek certainty and control. The constructed identity often serves as a way to create a sense of stability in an unpredictable world. By defining who we are, the mind attempts to reduce uncertainty and maintain a coherent narrative. However, this need for certainty can limit growth and exploration. When individuals become too attached to their self-image, they may resist experiences that challenge it, preferring the comfort of familiarity over the potential for change. By continuously observing these patterns, self-awareness weakens the illusion that the constructed identity is the whole truth. It reveals that there is always more beneath the surface, dimensions of experience that cannot be fully captured by labels or descriptions. This realization does not eliminate the sense of self but expands it, making it less rigid and more open to possibility. Letting go of labels begins with recognizing how deeply they are woven into everyday thinking. From an early age, people are given names not only for who they are, but for what they are supposed to be. These labels can be obvious, such as smart, shy, strong, or weak, or more subtle, like expectations tied to roles within family, culture, or society. Over time, these descriptors are repeated, reinforced, and internalized, until they feel inseparable from identity itself. A person no longer sees them as labels but as facts, as if they define the limits of what is possible. The challenge with labels is not that they exist, but that they become boundaries. Once someone accepts a label, it often acts like an invisible frame around their behavior and choices. A person who identifies as not creative may avoid artistic expression entirely, never exploring abilities that could develop with time and effort. Someone who believes they are bad at communication may hold back in conversations, reinforcing that belief through inaction. These patterns create a self-fulfilling cycle where the label shapes behavior, and the behavior strengthens the label. Letting go of labels does not mean denying past experiences or pretending that traits do not exist. It means refusing to treat them as permanent definitions. A label might describe a tendency or a pattern at a particular point in time, but it does not capture the full range of potential within a person. By seeing labels as temporary and situational, rather than fixed and absolute, individuals begin to loosen their grip on them. This shift opens the door to new possibilities, as actions are no longer constrained by a rigid sense of identity. One of the reasons labels are so powerful is that they provide a sense of certainty. They simplify complexity, offering quick answers to questions like, "Who am I?" and "What can I do?" In a world that is often unpredictable, this sense of certainty can feel comforting. However, it comes at a cost. The simplicity of labels often overlooks nuance, ignoring the fact that people are capable of change, growth, and contradiction. By relying too heavily on labels, individuals may sacrifice potential for the sake of familiarity. Bruce Lee emphasized the importance of being fluid and adaptable, a perspective that directly challenges the rigidity of labels. His philosophy encourages individuals to move beyond fixed definitions and embrace a more open and dynamic understanding of self. When labels are released, the mind becomes less concerned with maintaining a consistent image and more focused on responding authentically to the present moment. This shift allows for greater flexibility in thought and action, making it easier to adapt to new situations and challenges. Another important aspect of letting go of labels is the way it affects perception. Labels act as filters, shaping how people interpret both themselves and the world around them. When someone sees themselves through a particular label, they are more likely to notice information that confirms it while overlooking evidence that contradicts it. This selective attention reinforces the label, making it appear more accurate and stable than it actually is. By stepping back from these labels, individuals can begin to see experiences more clearly, without the distortion of preconceived notions. The process of releasing labels often involves questioning their origin. Many labels are not self-created but inherited from others: parents, teachers, peers, or societal norms. These external judgments can become internal beliefs, even when they are based on limited or outdated information. By examining where a label came from, it becomes easier to see that it is not an inherent truth but a perspective that was adopted over time. This realization weakens the authority of the label, making it easier to let go. There is also a psychological aspect to holding onto labels. They can become part of a person's sense of security, even when they are limiting or negative. A familiar identity, even an unfavorable one, can feel safer than the uncertainty of change. Letting go of labels requires stepping into that uncertainty, where the boundaries of identity are less defined. This can be uncomfortable, as it challenges the mind's need for stability. However, it is within this uncertainty that growth and transformation become possible. As labels begin to dissolve, a different kind of awareness emerges, one that is less focused on defining and more focused on experiencing. Instead of asking, "Is this consistent with who I am?" a person may begin to ask, "What is possible in this moment?" This shift encourages exploration and experimentation, allowing individuals to try new behaviors, develop new skills, and expand their understanding of themselves. Over time, this leads to a more flexible and resilient sense of identity. Letting go of labels also changes the way individuals relate to failure and success. When identity is tied to specific labels, outcomes can feel personal and definitive. Failure may be interpreted as proof of inadequacy, while success may create pressure to maintain a certain image. Without rigid labels, these experiences are seen more as feedback than as judgments of worth. This perspective reduces fear and encourages a willingness to take risks, as actions are no longer tied to a fixed sense of self. Bruce Lee often highlighted the importance of self-expression without restriction. This idea aligns closely with the process of releasing labels, as it allows individuals to act without being confined by predefined roles or expectations. When labels are set aside, behavior becomes less about fitting into a category and more about responding authentically to each situation. This authenticity fosters a deeper connection with one's actions, as they are no longer filtered through the need to uphold a particular identity. Over time, the absence of rigid labels creates space for continuous growth. Identity becomes something that evolves naturally rather than something that must be protected or maintained. This evolving sense of self is not chaotic or directionless. Rather, it is responsive and adaptable, shaped by ongoing experience rather than fixed definitions.